On a Sunday night in Chicago, a news anchor disappeared mid-sentence, replaced, for 90 seconds, by a figure in a rubber Max Headroom mask, swaying in front of a rotating sheet of corrugated metal. The figure hummed. It spoke in a distorted, unintelligible voice. Then it was gone. That was November 22, 1987. 37 years have passed. No one has ever been charged. No suspect has ever been publicly named. The Federal Communications Commission opened a formal investigation, interviewed dozens of witnesses, and quietly closed the file. Welcome to the grim archive. Tonight's file: the Max Headroom broadcast intrusion. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand how broadcast television worked in 1987. American television signals traveled through physical infrastructure, a hierarchy of transmitters, relay towers, and microwave links connecting studios to antennas. The Federal Communications Commission licensed every frequency, every transmitter, every operator. The system was regulated down to the watt. It was, in the language of the era, a closed airspace. Unauthorized transmission carried federal criminal penalties. The assumption, built into every layer of the system, was that the hardware required to hijack a signal was simply too expensive, too complex, and too conspicuous for any private individual to acquire or operate. Chicago in 1987 had a specific broadcast geography. WGN-TV operated on Channel 9. WTTW operated on Channel 11. Both signals traveled from studios, through microwave relay links, up to transmitters mounted on the John Hancock Center and the Sears Tower. That relay infrastructure, the invisible middle layer of the broadcast chain, was the vulnerability. It was not monitored in real time. It was not alarmed. Engineers had designed it to be robust and self-sustaining, which meant, in practice, that no human being was watching it on a Sunday night. The gap between the studio and the transmitter was, for all practical purposes, unguarded. Max Headroom was, at the time, a recognizable cultural figure. A fictional AI character from a 1985 British television film, he had crossed to American screens as the host of a music video show and, briefly, as the face of a Coca-Cola advertising campaign. The character was defined by jerky, looping speech and a digitized, synthetic appearance, achieved not with computers but with prosthetic makeup applied to actor Matt Frewer. Whoever planned the Chicago intrusion chose that mask deliberately. The choice suggested someone who followed television culture closely, someone who understood irony, someone who had been planning this for a while. The first intrusion happened at 9:14 p.m. WGN-TV was broadcasting its nightly sports segment. Sportscaster Dan Roan was speaking directly to camera when the signal died. For about 15 seconds, a figure in the Max Headroom mask appeared on screens across Chicago. It made no audible statement. WGN engineers, monitoring the outgoing signal from the studio, immediately identified the problem as a transmission interruption and switched to a backup audio feed. The intrusion ended before most viewers understood what they had seen. WGN notified the FCC that evening. That first appearance was a rehearsal. The intruder came back the same night. 2 hours later, at 11:15 p.m., WTTW was broadcasting a Doctor Who episode, Horror of Fang Rock. The same figure reappeared. This time the audio feed was active. What followed lasted approximately 90 seconds. The masked figure hummed, swayed, held up a Pepsi can, a possible jab at Max Headroom's Coca-Cola sponsorship, made fragmented, distorted statements, and was struck on the buttocks with a fly swatter by an accomplice who was never fully visible on screen. WTTW had no engineer on duty that night capable of overriding the signal. The intrusion ran its full course and ended on the intruder's terms. That asymmetry would define everything that followed. The FCC began its investigation the following morning. Special agents from the Chicago field office were assigned. The bureau that regulated American broadcasting had never investigated a case quite like this. What they needed was a record of the signal's origin, a direction, a frequency deviation, a power signature that could be triangulated to a physical location. What they found was that no such record existed. The monitoring equipment capable of tracing an unauthorized microwave transmission in real time had not been deployed along the Chicago relay corridor. The infrastructure had been built to carry signals, not to watch for intruders. There was no forensic trail. There had never been a reason to create one. Investigators interviewed engineers, broadcast technicians, hobbyist radio operators, and electronics suppliers across the Chicago metropolitan area. They were looking for someone who had purchased or assembled specific hardware, a portable microwave transmitter powerful enough to override an existing broadcast signal. This was not consumer equipment. It required technical knowledge that, in 1987, was concentrated among a narrow population: licensed engineers, military-trained technicians, university researchers. Accounts differ on exactly how many people were interviewed over the course of the investigation. What is documented is the conclusion. No credible suspect was identified. The equipment was never recovered. The mask was never found. Here is the institutional failure in plain language. The FCC licensed the frequencies. The FCC mandated the technical standards. The FCC enforced the penalties. But the FCC had no obligation and no mechanism to monitor the relay infrastructure between licensed transmitters in real time. The system assumed compliance because the barrier to non-compliance seemed prohibitive. When someone crossed that barrier, the agency had no instrument pointed in the right direction. It was not negligence in the conventional sense. It was a structural blind spot, a gap between what the regulations covered and what the technology actually required to enforce them. No one had written the rule because no one had imagined the violation. The FCC investigation was formally closed without charges. The exact date of closure has not been widely published in official records available to the public, though reporting from the early 1990s confirmed the case remained inactive. Over the following decades, the intrusion became a fixture of early internet culture, discussed on bulletin boards, archived on early video sites, analyzed frame by hobbyists and engineers. Several theories circulated. One name surfaced repeatedly in online forums in the 2010s, but it was never verified, never acted upon, and the individual in question has never been publicly confirmed as a suspect by any law enforcement agency. The case remains officially open. What the Max Headroom intrusion actually demonstrated was a principle that would define the next 4 decades of technology policy. Systems are secured against the threats their designers anticipated. The people who built American broadcast infrastructure in the 1960s and 1970s anticipated equipment failures, weather interference, and human error. They did not anticipate a motivated individual with surplus military electronics and a rubber mask. That gap, between the imagined threat and the actual one, is where the intrusion lived. It is also where data breaches live, where network vulnerabilities live, where every future failure of institutional imagination will live. The medium changed. The blind spot did not. Someone built a transmitter, drove it to a location with line of sight to a relay point on the Chicago broadcast chain, activated it for 90 seconds on a Sunday night, and left. The FCC never found the vehicle, never found the equipment, never found the person. Whoever did this understood the system well enough to walk through it, and understood the investigation well enough to leave nothing behind. Whether that person is still alive, still in Chicago, or aware that their 90 seconds became a permanent entry in the record of things that should not have been possible, is not known. The archive is always open.